how did decades of bitter rivalry between Armenia and Azerbaijan lead to this, a deal that could change the map of the Caucasus forever? And why are the world's most powerful nations suddenly circling this small, volatile region? This isn't just a peace agreement. It's a high-stakes chess match where every move is watched by Moscow, Ankara, and Tehran. In August 2025, the world watched as US President Donald Trump presided over a historic handshake between two bitter enemies, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Cameras flashed. Leaders smiled. And the White House proudly declared 35 years of conflict ended in 6 months. But what if that's not the full story? What if, behind the smiles and speeches, this deal wasn't just about peace, but about power, control, and a century-long footprint in one of the most volatile regions on Earth? In this video, you'll learn how a decades-old war began, why it ended so suddenly, and who really benefits from the Armenia-Azerbaijan deal. We'll explore the corridors of land that could reshape global trade, the silent power plays of Russia, Turkey, and Iran, and the question nobody in Washington wants to answer: is this peace or the opening move in a new great game? Stay with me, because before we can understand what was signed in Washington, we must first go back to the war that shaped it. And once you know the beginning, the ending will never look the same. The roots of this conflict stretch back to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. In the mountains of the South Caucasus lies Nagorno-Karabakh, a rugged, landlocked enclave, home to a majority ethnic Armenian population, but internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan. When the Soviet grip loosened, war erupted. By 1994, tens of thousands were dead, and over 1 million people were displaced. Armenia, backing the ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, emerged with control over the enclave and 7 surrounding Azerbaijani districts. A ceasefire froze the front lines, but it froze nothing in the hearts of either side. For Azerbaijan, the loss was an open wound. For Armenia, the victory was fragile. And for the powers around them, this unresolved conflict was not just a tragedy, it was an opportunity. Russian diplomat, 1995. The Caucasus is a chessboard. You do not win by ending the game, but by keeping it in play. Little did anyone know, the next moves were already being planned. On September 27, 2020, the ceasefire shattered like glass. Azerbaijan, flush with oil wealth and armed with Turkish Bayraktar drones, launched a lightning offensive across the front lines. In just 44 days, Azerbaijani forces retook large swaths of land lost nearly 3 decades earlier. The war ended under a Russian-brokered ceasefire. Russian peacekeepers were deployed to guard what remained of Armenian-controlled Nagorno-Karabakh. But this peace had an expiration date. 3 years later, in September 2023, Azerbaijan struck again, this time with even more precision. In less than 24 hours, the last Armenian positions collapsed. Nagorno-Karabakh fell completely under Azerbaijani control. More than 100,000 ethnic Armenians fled in an exodus so sudden it entered a land that had resisted for decades. And in Yerevan, panic set in. Armenia called on its ally, Russia, bound by the CSTO, for help. The CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, isn't just a military alliance, it's Russia's answer to NATO. Born in the ashes of the Soviet Union, it binds Russia, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan under one promise: an attack on one is an attack on all. But behind the formal pledges lies a sharper reality, a tool for Moscow to project influence, deploy troops at a moment's notice, and remind the West that it's not the only power with allies ready to move. The answer? Silence. Why Moscow stayed quiet would set the stage for one of the biggest geopolitical shifts in the region in 30 years. For decades, Armenia's security rested on Moscow's promises. Russian troops were stationed on Armenian soil. Weapons flowed in. The CSTO was supposed to guarantee protection. But in 2023, Russia's attention and its resources were swallowed by the war in Ukraine. When Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan made the call for help, Moscow didn't move a single battalion. Pashinyan, October 2023. We cannot rely on others to protect our sovereignty if they will not act when the moment comes. By early 2024, Armenia froze its participation in the CSTO, a public break with a decades-old security alliance. And in that break, Washington saw an opening. In early 2025, Armenia and the US signed a strategic partnership charter, marking Yerevan's pivot toward the West. Behind the scenes, US diplomats began working to bring Azerbaijan to the same table. On August 8, 2025, at the White House, Trump unveiled the deal. At its heart was the Zangezur Corridor, a vital link running through southern Armenia, connecting mainland Azerbaijan with its exclave of Nakhichevan, and beyond, to Turkey. Under the agreement, Armenia would keep sovereignty over the land, but the US would hold 99-year development rights over the infrastructure. Railways, pipelines, fiber optics, all under American management. To Washington, it was the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. To Moscow, it was a dagger at the edge of its former empire. In Moscow's marble corridors, the reaction was immediate and cold. The Kremlin's foreign ministry summoned the US ambassador for a midnight meeting, cameras catching the envoy's tense jaw as he left. Within hours, for Moscow, this wasn't just about Armenia or Azerbaijan. This was about the United States planting a flag in a space Russia had considered its sphere of influence for more than a century. Military commentators on Russian channels spoke in measured tones, but the subtext was clear: if the West controls the roads, the West controls the flow of power. In Tehran, the rhetoric was sharper and less subtle. Iranian lawmakers warned that the corridor, running just kilometers from their border, could become a staging ground for NATO intelligence and military hardware. "We will not tolerate a foreign dagger at our northern throat," one senior general declared. And then came the leaks. Western intelligence agencies intercepted chatter, fragments of conversations between mid-level Russian and Iranian officials, discussing how trip could be slowed, sabotaged, or simply made too expensive to complete. The alleged playbook included cyber attacks on construction firms, disinformation campaigns targeting Armenian public opinion, and arming local militias to defend sovereignty. No proof has surfaced. No country has admitted involvement, but in the Caucasus, silence can be as telling as confession. In Armenia's capital, Yerevan, the mood was split down the middle. On one side, government supporters waving American and Armenian flags, shouting that this was Armenia's chance to finally break free of Moscow's shadow. On the other, crowds furious, shouting that sovereignty had been sold for a promise written in Washington ink. Prime Minister Pashinyan stood on the parliament steps, insisting the deal preserved Armenia's borders and secured peace. His words were met with applause in some streets, and chants for his resignation in others. In Azerbaijan, the scene was very different. The streets of Baku erupted in celebration, fireworks reflecting in the Caspian Sea. President Aliyev's televised speech called the corridor a bridge of victory, the ultimate proof that diplomacy could seal what war had won. To most people, trip is a map line and a promise of trains, trucks, and trade. But to strategists, it's a pivot point. The steel rails of the corridor run deeper than the soil. They cut into the region's balance of power. Linking Azerbaijan directly to Turkey, trip bypasses both Russian and Iranian territory, giving NATO partners an economic artery free of hostile checkpoints. In Brussels, energy officials quietly celebrated. In Ankara, advisors spoke of new supply chains that could shift the regional economy. And in Washington? The Pentagon was studying the blueprints, not for the train schedules, but for what could move alongside them: fiber optic lines carrying sensitive data, fuel pipelines that could feed more than just market. The ground in the Caucasus remained unsteady. The Armenia-Azerbaijan border is still undermarketed in key stretches. Skirmishes could flare over a single misread map line. Dozens of prisoners from past conflicts remain in detention. Their fate, an open wound in both societies. And Azerbaijan has been pressing Yerevan to amend its constitution, removing language seen as hostile, a demand Armenia views as political overreach. For tens of thousands of Nagorno-Karabakh refugees now scattered in Armenia, Georgia, and beyond, the deal means little unless it includes a way home, something neither side is offering. The peace exists, but it rests on paperwork. The history of this region has shown how quickly paper burns. In the halls of the White House, the signing was celebrated as a masterstroke, proof that the US could still bend history toward peace. But history in the Caucasus has a habit of bending back. For Armenia, trip is a leap into the arms of a new protector, hoping those arms will not one day turn into shackles. For Azerbaijan, it's the final seal on a war they fought, and won, in blood. And for Washington? It's a foothold in one of the most contested crossroads on Earth, a place where trade routes and empires have risen and fallen for millennia. The real question isn't whether this deal will hold. It's whether this deal was ever meant to. History will answer. But here in the Caucasus, peace has always been the brief pause before the next storm. If history has taught us anything, it's that the most important stories are the ones they hope you're not looking at. At Truth in the Soil, we dig past the headlines, past the speeches, and down to the roots, to uncover what's really happening beneath the surface. So if you believe the truth matters, if you want to see through the smoke and know the story before it becomes history, please like, subscribe and share this video. And never stop asking the question, what lies beneath? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.